Hello and welcome to another edition of Fun with Flags. I am your friendly neighborhood soda and joined by the hash slinging slasher himself, 50. How's it going and why should I be afraid?
I don't know. You chose the topic. You tell me.
Yeah, okay, I was definitely not expecting this, and this does explain the name. So today we are here to discuss one of the probably the greatest true crime stories to ever come out of Canada. It is none other than the story of the Mad Trapper of Rat River. 50. Have you ever heard of this before?
Yeah, last week when you told me the topic for this week.
Okay, so no, he doesn't know anything about the topic. So basically, this was like a 30-day manhunt across snowy Yukon and Northwest Territories on foot and dog sled to try to apprehend this trapper who killed a cop and just wouldn't surrender. It is quite the story. Nobody knows who he is, even to this day. Like knows who he really is because he just showed up. And nobody knows how he did the things that he did, and you'll find out like just some of the feats that he was able to do. Not to glorify killing a cop or anything, but I mean like this is just quite the story.
However, before we move on,
Yeah.
just wanted to bring up this morning, as of the recording of this episode, we've suffered a great tragedy. The Israeli nation and the acting world, I should say, suffered a great loss in the late great Chaim Topol, who was in a rough condition last night, as of the Israeli time, as of the recording of this video, and this morning all the news reported that he sadly passed away
Now, would
at
you
the
mind telling the people who he is most famous for? Because I guarantee you, not a lot of people know his name.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you might probably know him as Reb Tevia, Tevia the Milkman from the iconic 1971
Mm-hmm.
Fiddler on the Roof. The movie that me and Soda lost the trivia match to Raiko,
Yeah.
and still kind of heard about that. But I mean,
Never
yeah,
get a chance to avenge it either.
yeah, never will. But we're not here to talk about our trivia losses. We're here to talk about Chaim Topol, who, of course, as I mentioned, was Reb Tevia in the Fiddler on the Roof stage play, which then obviously then transitioned into a big budget
So
Hollywood movie.
the one that is like that originated that role on Broadway as well, or on stage, I should say.
Yeah, he's the one that adapted it from the original source material
Oh,
to the stage, and he played that character for many years on
what's the source
stage.
material?
What?
What's the source material? I didn't know it was based on something.
It was based on a book.
I did not know that.
Based on a book written by a Russian Jew who was banished from his home back in the 20s, I think. Not really the topic here, but I mean, he originated that role, and then he obviously later then exploded onto the screens with roles in other movies, such as in Flash Gordon. He was in For Your Eyes Only. He also did some voice acting works a lot. Like, I personally knew him I grew up hearing his voice as the voice of Bagheera in the Hebrew dubbed version of the Jungle Book, and obviously the Jungle Book 2. He also did the Hebrew voice of Hagrid in the first two Harry Potter movies. This guy did a lot. He did a lot more than Reb Tevye. Obviously, probably aside from Tevye the Milkman in Israel, he's mostly famous as the iconic Salah Shabati. He did a lot of stage/movie performances in Israel, and obviously became a much larger actor in the United States and worldwide. He was recently, I believe, 2019, he did another full-on stage musical performance of Fiddler on the Roof that I believe can be found on certain streaming services. I can't remember, but
Wow, he was old when he died. So if it was just 4 years ago, dear Lord.
yeah. So if you would stop interrupting me. So yeah, he was a great legendary actor of the stage and screen, and a voice over as well. And he will be sadly missed. He was a great philanthropist as well, And like I said up top, the Israeli state and the acting world lost a great asset this morning, and we are here to mourn him. So
May he rest in peace, and
may he rest in peace.
because of how long he lived, man. Big bucket of win there. That dude lived a life.
Yep, absolutely.
92.
87 years young.
87. Where did I get 92 from? I could swear I read that earlier.
Well, just look at this.
Sorry, math. I used to be good at it. Yeah, man. No, that's a long life, man. 87. May we all be blessed to live that long.
Yeah, and have the accomplishments that he had.
Yes.
So, a moment of silence, if you will. Yeh zichro baruch.
What 50 said.
Yeah, that.
All right, and now on to someone who unfortunately didn't live a long life. Quite the segue. Okay, so the story of Albert Johnson, also known as the Mad Trapper of Rat River. The event became a media circus all over the world, actually, as Johnson eluded the Royal Canadian Mounted Police team sent to take him into custody, which ended after a 150-mile or 240-kilometer pursuit lasting more than a month, and a shootout in which Johnson was fatally wounded on the Eagle River of the Yukon. Albert Johnson is also suspected to have been a pseudonym, and his true identity remains unknown. Albert Johnson arrived in Fort McPherson after coming down the Peel River on July 9th, 1931. July 9th happens to be one of my best friend's birthdays. He was
July. Wait. Did you say July 9th?
July 9th, 1931.
July 9th is my birthday.
Oh, even yours as well. Yeah. So I've got two friends who have birthdays on there.
That's also the Independence Day of Argentina, by the way.
Oh.
And
Wow.
South Sudan. Sorry, I just know things. I'm sorry.
Hey, man, you really are 50 Shades of Geek. All right. Okay, so Albert arrived in Fort McPherson after coming down the Peel River on July 9th, 1931. He was questioned by RCMP Constable Edgar Millen, but provided little information. Millen thought he had a Scandinavian accent, generally kept himself clean-shaven, and seemed to have plenty of money for supplies. After venturing the waterways in an indigenous-built raft to the Mackenzie River Delta, he built a small 8x10 cabin on the banks of the Rat River. Johnson had not acquired a trapping license, which was considered odd for someone living in the bush. Now, 50, do you know what a trapper is?
I was literally just about to stop you and ask that question. Please explain.
So basically, a trapper is what its name entails. It is somebody that actually traps animals for a living, usually for food or to sell and trade and whatever. You don't have that many nowadays as an actual profession. Mostly it is still done by indigenous people and what have you for food and clothing and stuff.
So is that like an official job, or is it like...
It used to be an official job, yeah. Long time ago.
So it's not like poaching then?
No. Well, no, it's not. It's not poaching. It's like, so up here, like, we have deer and we have, bears and all that stuff. So basically all they do is they go and they set up traps.
We have a little bear too.
Yeah, exactly. No, all they do is they go and they set up traps in the bush. And then every once in a while they'll go and they'll check and they'll collect what they caught and stuff like that. That's just basically all it is.
What kind of traps are they setting for the...
Not really humane traps.
What?
Not non-humane traps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what a trapper is. At that time, many northern native traditional trapping areas were being invaded by outsiders fleeing the Great Depression, and some complaints may have been intended to remove him. In December of that year, indigenous trappers complained to the local RCMP detachment in Aklavik that Johnson was tampering with their traps, tripping them, and hanging them on the trees. A post-incident investigation by the RCMP found an entirely different story. Evidently, Johnson had roughly told them to take off and had even pointed a gun at them when they came a visit at Johnson's cabin.
So to go back to my previous question, he was non-official trapper.
Yeah, basically he would have been doing it illegally because he didn't have.
So he was a rogue.
Basically, yeah, basically a rogue.
Okay.
On December 26th, Constable Alfred King and Special Constable Joe Bernard, each of whom had a considerable northern experience, trekked the 60 miles to Johnson's cabin to ask him about the allegations. And this is where I'm going to hop over into the other thing. On arrival, King approached the door and, with his back to the wall of the cabin, leaned over and knocked upon the door with the back of his left hand. The only reply was a shot from within, which entered his chest, traveling across the body and out through his ribs on his right side. Constable McDowell then went to the assistance of his wounded comrade and, making him as comfortable as possible, loaded him in the carryall of the toboggan and started a race to Aklavik for medical attention. Perseverance and dogged determination are clearly exemplified in this dash to Aklavik. Leaving the vicinity of Johnson's cabin at noon, traveling during weather which was extremely cold with strong winds, having to break trail most of the way, easing the toboggan with its precious load over numerous portages, and letting it down as carefully as possible over 80 miles, and arriving by 8 a.m. the following morning was certainly a commendable feat. On arrival at Aklavik, Constable King was immediately attended by Dr. Urquhart. It was then discovered he had been shot with a jacketed bullet, thought to be a .38 automatic, which it fortunately had missed everything vital. The care and attention received, aided by his own splendid condition, enabled King to be up and around again in 3 weeks' time. This meant that Johnson was now wanted on a further charge, and Inspector Eames, RCMP, requested the Royal Canadian Signals personnel at Aklavik to broadcast a request to Constable Millen at Arctic Red River for him to report at once at the mouth of the Rat River. Meantime, the inspector had been preparing supplies, etc., to take another party out, and this party, consisting of the Inspector Constable McDowell, trappers Lang, Garland, and Sutherland, accompanied by 2 native guides, left Aklavik for the Rat River. En route, they picked up some dynamite in the hopes of being able to blow a hole in Johnson's cabin should he refuse to come out. Constable Millen, having received the message, was awaiting them at the mouth of the Rat River. Preferring to arrive at Johnson's cabin from above and following the lead of a native who led them astray, 2 days were lost, the natives leading them in a triangle around the cabin all the time, telling them cabin only 4 miles. They made camp and started out the mountain over the mountain on foot, traveling a distance of 14 miles before sighting the cabin. Trappers Garland and Lang circled the cabin and ascertained that Johnson was still there, but being on foot and having no supplies, they were forced to return the 14 miles to their base. Early next morning, the camp was moved closer, and operations to entice Johnson to come out of his cabin were commenced. The only reply was received was rifle fire from the cabin, which was apparently loopholed at all angles. A glimpse of the interior showed that the cabin had been dug out to a depth of about 2 or 3 feet. It was quite small, the roof well packed with earth about 1 foot in depth, and a small window about 1.5 feet by 3 feet. Later examination showed that the base of the cabin had a double row of logs and earth packed in between it. Thus, nature, freezing to earth, substituted frozen earth for concrete. The cabin presenting a veritable pillbox. Oh yeah, you'd be surprised what you can do with dirt and trees and stuff like that.
I mean, he sounds like a very crafty man.
Yeah.
I was going to stop you earlier and ask. So the native that led them astray, was he like on his payroll, or was he trying to do good and accidentally?
I have no idea. That doesn't actually mention it. Honestly, this is the first time in the story. I've heard different versions of the story. This is the first time I've actually heard that part.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually don't know. For 15 hours, during which the entire party had many narrow escapes, many attempts were made to have Johnson come out, but without success, and the charges of dynamite being poorly prepared and unconfined proved ineffectual. Supplies and dog food having run out, the party was forced to return to Aklavik. The RC Signals broadcast station was again pressed into service, and a request sent asking Dodman of the Hudson's Bay Company at Arctic Red River to keep operations moving with dried fish up the mouth of the Red River. The call was sent out asking for volunteers, and the National Defense Authority had been obtained. QMS Riddle. QMS is like a rank I've never heard of. I'm not familiar with, unfortunately. QMS Riddle, who had an enviable reputation in the North Country as a hunter, traveler, etc., and Staff Sergeant Hersey of the RC Signals, were gladly accepted by Inspector Eames. Preparation for this expenditure was going ahead quickly, and Riddle again brought his ingenuity into practice in making what he termed goose eggs. The engine cylinders of an old outboard motor were filled with gunpowder. A half-minute fuse with a length inserted to be cut as required was fed up through the intake port and then passed through a hole which had been drilled in the cylinder wall. The gunpowder was forced into a compact mass, and a 2-inch bolt passed through the cylinder head and then welded. Thus were the goose eggs created. Next, some lengths of 1.5 and 2-inch pipe were cut about 15 inches long. You know what? We don't need to hear about that. It's like, okay.
I love how you were like knee deep into that before deciding, no, let's move on.
Yeah, no kidding. So this thing that I'm reading apparently was written is an extract from the October 1948 Notes of Interest. So this is like older than my dad, what I'm reading.
Oof.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to just skip the next paragraph. It was considered communication for the base party with Aklavik would be of real value in obtaining additional supplies, further aid, or the doctor, if necessary. Signals personnel at Aklavik got busy on this and constructed a low-power transmitter to work around the... Jesus, they really like to talk about the frickin'...
They were thorough. What do you...
Okay, on January 18th, having given the party in the hills time to reach their base, Aklavik radio station commenced schedules, calling them at 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m., listening the first 10 minutes, and then calling the next with plenty of time to get signals synchronized. On January... Jeez. I'm trying to get to the part where they actually freaking go after the guy. Okay, there it is. There it is.
We should have proofread it before we went.
See, that's the thing. I did proofread the couple paragraphs, and it's like, okay, this sounds like we're going to good track. And I'm like, I saved it. I didn't even think to look at the rest of it. Dear Lord. Okay, but I'm at the part. On January 28th, with a temperature of 47 below and a slight headwind, Hersey and a native, each with a heavy load of supplies, set out for the base now located somewhere on the Rat River. The following day was 49 below, again with wind, and on Saturday the 13th, when they passed the old base site, it was 36 below. In the meantime, Riddle, Millen, Garland, and Verville had roamed and combed the timber around along the Rat River during every minute of daylight, trying to find some trace of Johnson. They found 2 caches, one containing about half a ton of grub. Those were left untouched as a possible bait and examined daily through field glasses in the hopes that he would endeavor to reach them and thus leave a trail, but no luck. The party was now out of dog feed, and their supplies consisted of a little tea, hardtack, and bacon only. They had been working in pairs, joining up at dusk on their way back to the base. While awaiting the tea to boil, Riddle went wandering around and came upon a faint trail crossing glare ice, following it to the top of the ridge where he lost it. He circled for a while and came across it again in a small creek. It appeared to be 1 or 2 days old as he returned to notify the others. Next morning, the party set off on this trail, but it was over hard, windswept ground. It was often lost and picked up again only in sheltered spots. Thus, they traced again for about 2 or 3 old camps before finally losing the trail altogether. Verville and Riddle now headed in one direction, and Millen and Garland in another. By this time, Johnson's habits had been fairly well known to them. That is, he was slowly but surely heading in the direction of the divide. He never crossed a creek unless on glare ice, and invariably he traveled the ridges which were hard-packed and where the slightest wind erased his tracks. At times, he even used his pursuers' trails. When he was ready to camp, he would strike a creek at the head, continue down it until he reached timber, and having selected his camping place, would continue on in a circle, backtracking far enough so he could watch and see anyone on his trail without being seen himself. The party was forced to extend and travel continually in half circles, trying to pick up his trail, and it was thus that Riddle and Verville came across a fresh trail leading to a small creek heading for the Bald Hills. And there they came across old quarters of caribou and reasoned he was short of grub and was away in search of caribou. They divided, one on each side of the trail, fully expecting to meet him returning, but after following the trail for some miles, it became obvious that he was making a huge circle and heading in the general direction of his starting point. So there's actually one part that they did skip, and they did have to smoke him out with the dynamite of his cabin. And this is actually
wondering if that would ever come into effect.
Yeah, because I've actually got a picture. That's that's his actual cabin after the fact.
What's left of it?
What's left of it? Yeah. Yeah, I was like, oh, free. Okay. All right. Early morning, Saturday morning, January 30th, they started again in a severe blizzard straight across the hillside to cover the 8 miles to Johnson's camp. And figuring out the best way to approach, Riddle and Garland traveled some distance along the ridge, got down to the creek, and took up a position about 15 or 20 yards from his camp. From there, Riddle had a view of the side opening and part of his tarp, while Garland had a clear view of the fire, presumably without Johnson being aware of their presence. Verville and Millen, seeing the others settled off for other positions, but unfortunately one of them slipped, making considerable noise. Johnson was heard to check his rifle and cough, but his definite position was not known. Verville got across an open shot, but when Millen followed, Johnson fired. Verville replied, but without having actually sighted Johnson. Johnson then moved for the first time across his fire and at the same time crossing Garland's sights, which is when he fired. For 2 hours, no sound or sign were noticed in Johnson's camp. Garland thought he had hit him and it was decided to approach. Verville went back to the original position about 60 feet away and with an advantage in height. The others extended under a cut bank about 5 yards from the camp. Riddle was easing his way along the ridge when he noticed something funny, and in making for the cover of a heavy spruce to take a closer look, a shot whistled by his head. Verville could not see where this had come from, and Riddle, yelling, "Look out," took a flying dive at the top of the bank and slid over into deep snow out of sight. Constable Millen, in Riddle's rear, having spotted where Johnson was, dropped to one knee and fired twice. Johnson replied with 3 shots, and on the third, Millen spun around and, standing erratically, immediately fell upon his face. Riddle, having worked his way to a new position, now found that what he had first thought to look funny was the end of Johnson's rifle protruding from a mound of some kind. The 3 opened fire on this, and Johnson withdrew his rifle. The question now is to reach Millen and find out how badly he had been hit. Riddle took up a position from where he could fire every time the muzzle of Johnson's rifle showed. While Verville and Garland went to Millen, Riddle's shots were forced Johnson to keep his rifle under, and he was unable to fire. Being afraid Millen would freeze to death if wounded and left where he had fallen, he was half carried and half dragged under the cover of the cut bank. Here, he was closely examined and found to be dead. Spasmodic firing was... Spasmodic? Okay, that's a word I've never heard before.
That's a word.
Yeah, spasmodic firing was continued until dusk with no apparent results. At this time, Millen's rifle was retrieved, and it being dark with every advantage in Johnson's favor, they were forced to return to their base. Meanwhile, Hearsay had returned with supplies, and the native accompanying him on hearing the report immediately made off into the bush and stayed there. With the exception of, so apparently it was a chicken. With the exception of Hearsay, the party was in bad shape. Weather conditions had been miserable, and the fact of their having to stick to the trail made their duffels particularly useless through dampness. Their bedrolls and clothing were in the same state, which, you've clearly never obviously been near snow, but man, it sucks when you're snow camping and your stuff gets wet.
Oof.
Ugh, I can just feel it now.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, they had been on the go continually since January 16th. So at this point, it's like 14 days or something like that. They've been just on the go. And it was quite apparent that they needed a short period of rest, sufficient at least to get things dried out. Their radio equipment was 25 miles away, and having been away from it so long, the batteries would be frozen and it would therefore be useless. After a meal, Riddle hitched up his team and with the native who had selected the best of his own and Millen's dogs, started for Aklavik. This run was another record. Riddle covered over 1,000 miles in bad weather across country where there is 40 miles of bad trail to every 15 miles of good, and at a time immediately following a blizzard when the trail was blown clear in spots and completely buried in others, and reached Aklavik in 20 hours. On February 2nd, everything was ready for another start from Aklavik. A north wind traveling between 30 and 45 miles per hour made it impossible to see further than 100 feet in front of you. Nevertheless, the party left Aklavik at noon. At 6:30 p.m. on this date, the radio station picked up the Edmonton Journal station announcing that a plane was being sent to assist the search. Inspector Eames badly wanted this information before leaving, but could not afford to wait. While carrying out the usual Tuesday evening broadcast program from Aklavik, a request was sent out to Blake at the Husky River or anyone in Fort McPherson to send a team to meet the Inspector of the Rat and give him this information. Shortly after this, Jack Parsons came in and, thinking he could catch the party before they left Lang's place, hitched up and started at once. His intention was to carry on until he caught up with them, so it was not certain the inspector would get the information. The radio station next received a request from the Canadian Airways asking them to call Good Hope, never heard of that before, to have 2 barrels of gasoline down at the best landing place on the river. when one considers the extreme cold weather and the fact that the engines of the plane failed, resulting in a further lost time, the value of the radio here is readily apparent. Okay. Any questions?
I'm kind of skipping ahead, but how long did it take? How many days?
Over a month.
So, hearing you read it out like that, it kind of sounds like a war, like a one-man war against the authorities.
Basically, is what it ended up being.
It's like this guy sounds like the Punisher, only he's not doing it for justice reason.
Exactly. One of the reasons people think he might have been a criminal before he got up there was because of how didn't want to be talked to, didn't want to get in contact with cops. Like, dude was very secretive. Like, literally nobody knew anything about him.
I mean, just from the story you're reading, he sounds like a criminal with the way he's being methodical and calculative. Like, he sounds like maybe he didn't plan for it to go this way, but he sounds like he was very quick on his feet. Like, he knew how to defend his own fort if he needed to.
Yeah, no, the dude was incredibly ingenious. Okay, on February 4th, it being considered that Riddle should have now reached his base, Aklavik radio station opened the usual schedules with him, sending progress of the plane, yada, yada, yada. This was sent blind and no answer was received. Meantime, 6 white men had arrived in Aklavik and answered the call broadcast for volunteers and were standing by awaiting the inspector's instructions. The plane arrived at Aklavik on February 6th, and this information was immediately transmitted to the party on trail. Next day, the plane took off about noon in dull and foggy weather, made contact with some of the base party, and landed Constable Carter, who had come in from the outside to report to Inspector Eames. The plane, having picked up trails which gave the impression Johnson was now legging it for all he was worth, was able to give the base party some valuable information. In the evening, Aklavik called on the usual schedules, giving them the information regarding the tracks and also instructions to move the base up about 12 miles to the out camp. Don't know what an out camp is. Inspector Eames
outside.
Touche. Inspector Eames and Riddle were to meet the plane at the same place as it had landed that day. For the first time, Riddle remained in a camp the entire day and apparently was not idle. He had worked with the transmitter. Who gives a shit?
I love how committed to the topic you are.
This is honestly, I'm going to share a documentary with you after we're off camera that I think you'd find interesting to watch on this. Let's see. The plane took off from Aklavik at 10:30 a.m. the next day, and on his return, the pilot reported he had landed and met the party waiting for him, took Riddle up, showing him the trails and where they seemingly ended abruptly. Closer examination disclosed a faint trail at the head of the Barrier River circling to the right and ending in some timber along the river from where a distinct trail could be seen joining Johnson's old trail. There being no detailed maps of the country, we will endeavor to describe what happened. Okay. From the party's camp, the Barrier River runs parallel with the divide, the mountains between the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, its head being about 12 miles up from their camp. Having worked clear the canyon and a small patch of timber where the party of 4 were searching when the plane first came over, Johnson had traveled on the bald tundra for a while until he hit the next creek. Going down this till he reached the Barrier River, then headed straight up. Reaching the head of the river, he again took to the tundra and hard-packed snow, circling back on his trail till he came to a small draw and some sparse timber where he camped for a time. He then headed back to his old trail, and doubling this for a while, he traveled up a creek leading to the divide, and going on up to the head, he paralleled with the mountains and his old trail, and heading down another creek to strike his old trail again on the Barrier River, about 4 miles above his pursuer's camp. Before doing this, he had evidently climbed to a higher ridge and looked things over very carefully. Once on his old trail again, he traveled up the barrier and branching off another creek, this time continuing through a pass which was practically all glare ice. He headed down to the Bell River on the Yukon side. Yeah, this guy, he was definitely covering his tracks.
Yeah, like I said, methodical.
Yeah. It was only a surmise, but it appears very likely what he had been endeavoring to do was to get back to timber and possibly his cache, expecting to have circled around the search party. Coming out where he did leads one to believe that possibly he heard the dogs, or may even have seen the smoke, and then finding himself cut off, made a desperate attempt to get over the divide. Owing to high winds, The plane could not take off on Tuesday, February 9th. On Wednesday, the pilot tried to land in the hills, but terrific winds, which swept the snow to a height of 1,000 feet, made that impossible, and he was forced to return to Aklavik. He made a further attempt to get in with supplies in the afternoon, but was again unsuccessful and was forced to land these supplies at the mouth of the Red River. All right, let's see if I can skip ahead to where they... Okay, you know what? I'm just going to hop straight over to Wikipedia now. Okay.
Again, proofreading.
Yeah, shut up. Okay, so a posse was then formed consisting of 9 men, 42 dogs, and 20 pounds of dynamite, which he intended to use. I'm just going to go back a little bit here. Was intended to blast Johnson out of the cabin if necessary. After surrounding the cabin, they thawed the dynamite inside their coats. The common version states that this charge was thrown onto the roof of the cabin, collapsing it in the following explosion, which is what the picture I showed you. After the explosion, the men tried to rush in. Johnson opened fire with a 5-foot dugout beneath the ruins. No one was hit, and after 15-hour standoff in the negative 40-degree weather, the posse retreated to Aklavik for further assistance. Again, the RCMP investigative report partially contradicts this, claiming that the dynamite charge barely damaged the cabin, but it was later purposely destroyed to prevent him from returning to it, which may have led the impression that some that the blast had destroyed it. Sorry, my dad's here.
I figured.
I'm literally on live right now, Dad.
Okay.
I'm recording. What's up?
You held it for a long time?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Live TV, folks.
Okay.
So I give you a loan.
Okay.
I give it to him now.
Okay.
And you got enough for tonight and tomorrow for you.
Perfect. Great. See you later, Dad. Mom sent over lasagna.
Hey.
Okay, so by this point, the news had filtered out to the rest of the world via radio. After being delayed because of blizzard conditions, which is where I kind of gave up in the other article, the reinforced posse returned on January 14th to find that Johnson had left the cabin, and the posse struck out after him. Eventually, they caught up with him on January 30th, so 16 days later, surrounding him in a thicket. And this, wow. In the ensuing firefight, this is where Johnson shot Constable Edgar Millen through the heart, killing him. Millen was later to have a tributary of the Rat River, Millen Creek, named for him. Memorial is located in the area. Once again, they fell into retreat. The posse continued to grow, enlisting local Inuvialuit. I've actually never heard of that before. And Gwich'in, who were
It's your country, man.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not familiar with a lot of the tribes and stuff up there. Western Canadian Inuit. Okay, it's Inuit people. Okay. Sorry, I just learned something new myself. Who were better able to move in the backcountry. Johnson had clearly decided to leave for the Yukon, but the RCMP blocked the only 2 passes over the Richardson Mountains. That did not stop Johnson, who climbed a 7,000-foot peak and once again disappeared.
Was that guy superhuman or something?
He didn't have the equipment. He really didn't have much clothing. Like, he makes you wonder.
Yeah.
In desperation, the RCMP hired World War I flying ace and leading post-war aviator Wilfred Whop May of Canadian Airways to help in the hunt by scouting the area from the air. Now, this guy actually has a claim to fame. 50. Have you ever heard of the Red Baron?
Yes.
The World War I fighter pilot?
Yeah. Yes.
Whop May was the guy that the Red Baron was chasing when he was shot down.
Okay.
Random curveball, ain't it?
I didn't. Well, to quote you from last week's topic, did not see that coming.
Nope. He arrived in the new ski-equipped Bellicana monoplane on February 5th. May discovered that Johnson had crossed the Richardson Mountains when the airplane saw his tracks on the far side of the range. On February 14th, he discovered the tactics Johnson had been using to elude his followers. He noticed a set of footprints leading over the center of the frozen surface of the Eagle River to the bank. Johnson had been following the caribou tracks in the middle of the river, where they walked in order to give them better visibility of approaching predators. Walking in the tracks had hidden his footprints and allowed him to travel quickly on the compacted snow without having to use his snowshoes. He left the trail only at night to make camp on the riverbank, which is the track that May had spotted. May radioed back his findings, and the RCMP gave chase up the river eventually being directed to Johnson by February 17th. I do have a picture of Wap May. This is the gentleman right here. He is definitely a Canadian legend. He's got a lot of stuff named after him in his native Edmonton. Yeah. All right. So the pursuit team rounded a bend in the river to find Johnson only a few hundred yards ahead, standing in front of them. Johnson attempted to run for the bank, but was not wearing his snowshoes and could not make it. A firefight broke out in which RCMP Constable Alfred King was seriously wounded, and Johnson was killed after being shot in the left side of the pelvis at an acute angle. It is believed that the bullet passed through vital tissues, bowels, and main arteries, which led to his death. May landed the plane, picked up the injured officer, and flew him for help, for which he was credited with saving his life. After Johnson's death, RCMP officials realized that he had traveled over 137 kilometers away from his cabin in 33 days, burning approximately 10,000 calories a day in the cold weather and hostile terrain. 75 years later, in 2007, forensic teams found that his tailbone was not actually symmetrical, causing his spine to curve left and right slightly. In addition, one foot was longer than the other. So basically, he had scoliosis.
And did all that. So, Doctor Who writers, are you taking notes?
Yeah, right? And actually, I do have a picture here of how far he traveled. This is the map. So on the right hand side, where the heck is this cabin on there? Yeah, okay. So on the right hand side of the end of the red thing, you'll see this cabin.
Yeah, where it says Johnson's cabin.
Yeah, and then look how far he traveled to where it says he was killed over mountains. 1 inch equals 8 miles.
So
the far left
that's
of the picture.
that's where the authorities came from. That's way up in the northern map.
So the scale is 1 inch equals 8 miles.
Okay, 8 miles. So the red line, that's his route.
That's his route.
Damn.
Right? Like,
again, notes, Doctor Who people. Just get out of Great Britain and start exploring other avenues.
An examination of Johnson's body yielded over $2,000 in both American and Canadian currency, as well as some gold, a pocket compass, a razor, a knife, fish hooks, nails, a dead squirrel, a dead bird, a large quantity of Beecham's pills, and teeth with gold fillings that were believed to be his. During the entire chase, the Mounties never heard Johnson utter a single word. The only thing they heard, or at least I've read that they thought they heard, was Johnson's laugh after he shot Constable Edgar Millen. Apparently they heard him laugh after he killed the guy. To this day, people debate who he was, why he moved to the Arctic, or if he was actually responsible for interfering with the trap lines as alleged. And so basically when he died, he had this grimace on his face that almost looked like he was laughing at them. And forgive me, but this is actually his post-mortem shot. Yeah. He was incredibly emaciated, like he'd lost a lot of weight, obviously. And so now the identity, the RCMP sent a series of photographs throughout Canada and the United States in an unsuccessful effort to learn his real identity, which has never been definitively established. In the 1930s, the initial investigation about the identity of Albert Johnson primarily focused on an obscure individual named Arthur Nelson. Details of Nelson's life are recorded by Yukon researcher and author Richard North. Nelson apparently traveled from Dease Lake, British Columbia, up into the Yukon in the 1927 to 1931 period. He had similar guns as Albert Johnson, and Nelson was also remembered by Cascadena elders Art John Sr. and others who knew him by the alias of Mickey Nelson when he trapped and prospected in the Ross River region in west central Yukon. North's 1989 book Trackdown put forward his theory that Albert Johnson, Arthur Nelson, and a North Dakota repeat criminal by the name of John Johnson were one and the same person. John Johnson did time in San Quentin Prison and Folsom Prison, which is the famous Folsom Prison Blues from Johnny Cash. And his physical description is well documented and similar to Mad Trappers. North traced John Johnson's identity back to Norway. Johnny Johnson was born Johan Conrad Jonsson in Bardu, Norway, north of the Arctic Circle. However, The Mad Trapper's expensive dental work were not likely to belong to the criminal Johnson. Also, DNA tests involving John Johnson's great nephew, Ole Getz, disproved that Johnny Johnson and the Mad Trapper were the same people. The Johnson family of Pictou, Nova Scotia, have long believed that Albert Johnson is actually Owen Albert Johnson, a relative who had left Pictou at the beginning of the Great Depression to find work in the United States. The family's last letter from Johnson was posted from Revelstoke, British Columbia, early in 1931. They never heard from him again. According to a 2009 radio interview, a relative was arranging for DNA tests, and actually, this one I do know as of today, they still actually haven't done the DNA tests. So, yeah.
I wonder what they're waiting for.
I don't know. Yeah, you think something like that? Yeah.
Maybe they did took the DNA tests, and they actually concluded that the results were actually
Maybe
non-human, and they didn't want to release it to the public.
I do also have a picture here of all his items that were on him. So this is everything they found on him, not including the dead animals, of course.
So that's what snowshoes look like.
Yep.
Actual proper snowshoes.
Yep, that's what actual proper snowshoes look like. And if I'm not mistaken, all of these items are in a museum somewhere up north.
I expected they would be.
Yeah. Previous theories were challenged with the release of Mark Fremerlid's book, What Became of Sigvald Anyway? This is actually a book, when I heard about this, I have tried to find, but it's out of print. He proposed too many coincidences to ignore the possibility of Sigvald Pedersen Hoskjold from Norway emerging as Albert Johnson. Sigvald was last known as a highly self-sufficient 32-year-old in 1927, 4.5 years before the chase and death of Albert Johnson, who was estimated between 35 and 40 years. Sigvald had become obsessed with the notion that the authorities were still looking for him after invading conscription during the First World War. He had built a fortress-like cabin on Digby Island on the north coast of BC before disappearing. This author points out circumstantial evidence for this case. Now, this part I'm more familiar with because it's talking about a documentary that I have watched quite a few times. In August 2007, a forensic team assembled by Myth Merchant Films located and exhumed Johnson's grave near the cemetery in Aklavik, then conducted a modern forensic examination of his remains. These were documented in the documentary film The Hunt for the Mad Trapper and the book The Mad Trapper: Unearthing a Mystery by Barbara Smith. This team found that isotopic analysis of his teeth suggested he may have grown up in Scandinavia or the U.S. Midwest, that he had scoliosis, which would have led to chronic back pain, that he was approximately 35 years of age, and that he had been struck multiple times in his final gun battle, including his throat, thorax, and a debilitating shot from behind through his pelvis. A spinal fracture of his femur supports the anecdote that a bullet had hit and exploded an ammunition pack on his hip. His dental work was of very high quality for the time suggesting he was able to afford expensive state-of-the-art work at a major center such as Chicago or New York. DNA samples were also obtained for comparison work. After the examination, his remains were reinterred with full religious rites by both the local priest and native elders, something that had not been afforded to him at his original burial. While many people have offered convincing circumstantial and anecdotal evidence that they were related to him, the DNA analysis ruled out all of the candidates, and his identity remains a mystery. In 2017, it was decided to attempt a familial DNA investigation. However, technical problems with the DNA eluded analysis until an adequate sequence was developed by Othram Inc. in 2021. Further investigation by Othram traced his ancestors to Sweden, linking him to multiple descendants of Gustaf Magnusson and Britta Svensdotter. Love that. I just love how the Scandinavians name their kids. Yeah, that's Magnus' son. Oh,
yeah, it's like you've seen Eurovision: The Story of Fire Saga, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like Lars Eriksson and Sigrid Eriksdotter.
Yeah,
that's how they name their children.
It's the first time I've ever seen the daughter one in writing. For some reason, I've never seen it before until now, and it's just like, my God. Yeah. Anyways, it's this investigation is suggesting that he was either their descendant or the descendant of one of their close relatives. Many of his genetic matches trace his ancestry to the Swedish towns of Hanger, Kavsjö, and Koltra. As of July 2021, further DNA samples of family history were being sought for possible descendants to further the investigation. Now, my suggestion, just do 23andMe, guys. Just send it in there. That's honestly how a lot of cold cases have been solved, is by using genealogy websites like that. And that pretty much brings the end to the story.
One conclusion. I clearly was off my rocker with this as my prop.
Yep.
Never bring a knife to a gunfight.
Pretty much in this sense, yeah. No, it's definitely quite the story. It's one that I've read a few books on and I've watched a few documentaries on. It's just, I don't know why, but this story has just always fascinated me.
I mean, you told me that we're gonna have a story about a guy who killed some people and it was a manhunt. I mean, I just assume, the traditional, this sort of stuff. I mean, hence my name, which knowing you probably have no idea where this is from either.
Actually, it sounds familiar. I've been trying to place it since I saw it.
You've been distracted by it, haven't you?
A little bit. Hash slinging slasher. Hash slinging. It's either Doctor Who or Marvel.
That trash bringing smasher, the flash flinging thrasher, the sash wielding, the thrash minging, the brash blinging smasher.
Sorry.
It's from SpongeBob.
Okay, see, I've never seen.
I knew you were never gonna get it.
Yeah, not even a freaking chance in hell.
Hopefully, this brought a smile to someone's face seeing this.
No, okay, yeah. Well, I'm telling them the story about traveling through mountains and snow and murder, and
yeah. Hopefully, there's some positivity, or rather, some smile activity came from this name.
Yeah. All right. So you had told me that you had wanted to announce it on the show what we were doing next week.
Yes, it's a topic that I've been wanting to do for a while. I was going to do it last week, but obviously that the Purim stuff took precedent. But now I decided that the time is right. And just like I told you when I finished doing my topic for last week, I sort of gave it a tease, but now I'm going to double on that point. The next topic for me for next week will require your full attention, good sir. Bring your notebook and a pen because you are going to learn. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
You are going to learn the Hebrew language.
Oh, freaking right.
Or to be more specific, the Hebrew alphabet.
Cool.
So,
I'm actually looking forward to that.
Like I said, we're gonna go. Don't be too distracted by all these letters. We're going to go through over every single letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and hopefully by that point, by the end of it, you'll have a little bit more of an understanding of what the hell I'm sending you on our messages chats whenever I accidentally switch from the English to the Hebrew.
Wow, I didn't. There's only 27 letters.
22, but 27. Let's stay for next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
For sure. Yeah. Okay. I will definitely bring my whiteboard and.
Yep. And I'll even try to if I can find some. I'll even try to have examples of certain words.
Sweet.
So
all right,
make it easier.
All right. Well, 50. Where can everybody find you?
You can find me every Thursday on this show and every Monday also on this channel talking about the greatest show in the galaxy, Doctor Who, with a random guest every week. And also on my own YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek, I do weekly reviews of every single Doctor Who episode from 1963 all the way to 2022. And also I was fairly recently, as of a few days ago, on the final episode of Let's Talk About Star Wars on our good friend Taco's channel, doing the finale of the Star Wars or Not.
I'm so bummed that I had to miss that.
Yeah, well, I'm so bummed that I had to lose the way that I did, but spoilers for that one, so go ahead and see how badly I did on that game.
It wouldn't be a Star Wars game on Taco's channel. if you didn't somehow lose a question in spectacular fashion.
You realize you're talking to the guy that won the first one they ever did, right?
Right, but I'm thinking about the Menoptera and it's stuff like that. It was
Yes,
like
thank you for reminding me. But
was it a
nothing,
moment like that?
nothing that happened in that one even came close
Okay,
to the
that's what I was
Menoptera.
asking. That's what I was asking. Okay, and as for myself,
What I'm gathering from that question is you still haven't seen it,
no, it's no, not yet.
right?
And as for myself, you can find me on my personal Instagram and Twitter at soda_the_Saxman. You can find me here on the Northern Entertainment Group. You can also find me on the Blokes of Wrestling on Friday nights over on the Let's Get Ready Network. However, starting the Friday of WrestleMania weekend will be the launch and debut of the Blokes of Wrestling YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find me over there doing a whole bunch of wrestling content. So until then, thank you very much for joining myself in 50 as I rambled on for about 45 minutes about the Mad Trapper. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell us what you thought or your thoughts on the Mad Trapper story. And we will see you next week, guys. And don't forget, just let your geek flag fly and have a good time.
And rest in peace, Chaim Topol.
Yes. May he rest in peace. Salute.
Yeh zechro baruch.
What he said.